Okay, we have a nice long answer problem here regarding this particular reaction. Carbon tetrachloride can be synthesized according to the reaction above here. A chemist runs the reaction at a constant temperature of 120 Celsius in a rigid 25-liter container. So the first question is, chlorine gas is initially present in the container at a pressure of 0.4 atmospheres. How many moles of Cl2 are in the container? So this is very straightforward. We're dealing with an ideal gas. We have pressure, we have temperature, we have volume, right? And we want moles. So this is very straightforward. PV equals nRT, our indispensable ideal gas law, and we want to solve for moles. So let's just rearrange that to be N equals PV over RT. So we can divide both sides by RT. We get N equals PV over RT. So let's go ahead and solve. So P is 0.4 atmospheres. V is 25.0 liters. Let me give myself a little more room there. Then R, we know, is 0.08206. And that is liters, atmospheres per mole K. And then the temperature, that's the only thing we need to change. We need this in Kelvin, and 273 plus 120 is 393 Kelvin, right? So we always add 273 to the Celsius temperature to get the Kelvin temperature. So that's going to be 393. So very straightforward, right? That's just a very simple ideal gas law calculation, and we're going to get 0.31 moles of Cl2. So that's that, 0.31 moles. How many grams of carbon disulfide are needed to react completely with the Cl2? So now we have a very straightforward stoichiometry question. So we know that 0.31 moles of Cl2 are reacting, right? And so what are we going to do here? So we need to look at the stoichiometric coefficients. If that many moles of Cl2 react, how many moles of CS2 are going to react? So there's going to be 1 mole of CS2 for every 3 moles of Cl2, right? Because we have a 1-to-3 ratio right there. So that is going to get us into moles of CS2. Then once we have moles of CS2, we just multiply by 76.13 grams per 1 mole. That is the molar mass of CS2. We can just go to the periodic table, add those up, add the average atomic masses up. And that is going to get us to 7.9 grams of CS2. So far so good. Very straightforward stuff. We definitely should be able to do these things. We need to use we need to be able to use PV equals nRT to solve for a missing variable, and then we need to be able to do a very straightforward stoichiometric calculation like this. Now, a little bit of a different way of looking at it. At 30 degrees Celsius, the reaction is thermodynamically favorable, but no reaction is observed to occur. However, at 120 degrees Celsius, the reaction occurs at an observable rate. Explain how the higher temperature affects the collisions between the reactant molecules so that the reaction occurs at an observable rate at 120 degrees Celsius. So, what does the higher temperature mean in terms of the collision? So a higher temperature means a higher average kinetic energy for the particles. So higher temp means a greater average kinetic energy. So as the temperature goes up, the collisions are occurring with greater kinetic energy. And so if the collisions are occurring with greater kinetic energy, the probability that one such collision will have sufficient energy to go above the activation barrier, above the activation energy, is greater, right? So if here's the activation barrier and all the collisions are below it, none of them are going to react. But if we raise that temperature, right, the average kinetic energy of the collisions is greater and greater and greater until if the average energy of a collision is above the activation energy, that means the reactions are going to go very quickly, because as soon as reactant molecules collide, they'll react because they'll have enough energy because they're zipping around so fast because of how hot it is. So that would be the reasoning, some verbalization of what we just said. A greater temperature means greater average kinetic energy for the particles, which means more collisions will be able to overcome the activation barrier. Now, the graph below shows a distribution for the collision energies of reactant molecules at 120 degrees Celsius. Draw a second curve on the graph that shows the distribution for the collision energies of reactant molecules at 30. So this is for 120. So just real quick, we will see these sometimes. This says fraction of collisions, and this is energy of the collisions. So very few collisions have this tiny amount of energy. Very few collisions have this incredible amount of energy, right? So more and more, most of them are around here, right? This is just telling us that, so as we go up on the y-axis, more of the collisions have this energy, right? So what are we saying here? This is for 120, and we want to show it for 30. We know that the average kinetic energy of a collision is lower in energy, and so the fraction of collisions, everything is going to shift this way. Everything, we're going to kind of squeeze it to the left, right? Because more and more of the collisions will have a lower and lower energy. More of the collisions will have a lower energy here. This will get shoved to the left, right? The most frequent, right, the top of this little curve here is going to get shoved this way, but then it's also going to get spiked up because everything's being compressed, right? And second, we definitely want to have the curve be very, very low by the time we get to the activation energy, because it's said that at 30 the reaction is thermodynamically favorable, but no reaction is observed to occur. So if nothing is observed to occur, that means very, very few collisions are able to surpass the activation barrier. So we want to be very low, very close to the x-axis over here. So it's a little hard to draw with this pen, forgive me, but let's give it a try. In fact, let's make sure we're even to the left right away. So we want to go up, and we want to go higher, and we want to be to the left. And we want to be very low by the time we get there. So as long as you do something kind of like that, it can't look crazy, but you need this curve, and we need this to be higher and to the left, right? So higher and to the left of the original peak. So this is, again, we're talking about fraction of collisions versus the energy of the collision. So let's check out a few more. They really like to pack a lot of different concepts into these long answer questions. So S2Cl2 is a product of the reaction, and now we want to show the Lewis diagram. So let's show the Lewis diagram. Whenever you're doing these Lewis diagrams, the best thing to do is to draw just do the Lewis symbol for each element. So for example, we have sulfur has 6 valence electrons. So let's draw 6. That's just 1 right there. This sulfur also has 6. Whoops. And you want to put the unpaired ones kind of next to each other, so that, because we're about to make bonds, right? And then Cl looks like this. Cl has 7. Here's 7 over here. Okay, so now everywhere there are unpaired electrons on adjacent atoms, we make a bond. Now usually we do that with a line. Here for these ones, they want the electron pairs, so you want to just put the pair of electrons. So let's go in here, and we can just erase. So that's going to be a bond, that's going to be a bond, that's going to be a bond, because those are adjacent unpaired electrons. So there's a bond. There's a bond, and there's a bond. And you can see everything has an octet, and this is actually very straightforward. They just each each of these atoms has an octet around it, and and we're all set. So that's the Lewis diagram there. Now, what is the approximate value of the Cl-SS bond angle in the S2Cl2 molecule? So that's right from Cl to S. So now we need to understand the geometry. So we're treating one of these sulfur atoms as a central atom, right? And so we're saying that we've got a Cl up here, and we've got SCl over here, and we've got two lone pairs. So this is tetrahedral, right? This is sp3 hybridized and tetrahedral electron domain geometry because it has 4 electron domains. So when you're assessing the geometry, the very first thing we do, remember, is to count up the electron domains. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It's got 4 things around it: 2 bonding pairs of electrons and 2 lone pairs. So 4 electron domains. We're going to need 4 orbitals to make the hybrid orbitals. So sp,p,p, sp3 hybridized. sp3 hybridized means tetrahedral electron domain geometry. So when they ask for the bond angles, there's a range that they're going to allow. So the easiest thing to do is to just use the bond angle that you've memorized. I know it's going to be different because there are lone pairs. So methane is not the same as ammonia, which is not the same as water. But we can just go ahead and use 109.5 that we memorized for methane. Let's just say 109.5. That is going to be in the acceptable range, because if you go and try to guess and say, oh, it's going to be a little bit less because the lone pairs are pushing a little more than the bonding pairs of electrons, and that's true. It's probably 107 or 106 or something like that. There's no reason to guess and then risk getting outside of the acceptable range, because they're going to make it a point to have 109.5 within the allotted range. So just do that. You don't have to guess. You can just do, it's just the bond angles for methane. It's not perfectly accurate, but it's going to be a good enough answer. So let's say 109.5 right there. Okay, so CCl4 can also be produced by reacting CHCl3 gas with Cl2 gas at 400 degrees Celsius, as is represented here. At the completion of the reaction, a chemist successfully separates CCl4 from HCl by cooling the mixture to 70 degrees Celsius, at which temperature the CCl4 condenses, so it returns to being a liquid. Right, these are gases, and we produce new gases, but when we cool it down, CCl4 condenses, while HCl remains a gas. So, number 1, identify all types of intermolecular forces present in HCl. So, when you're asked to list the types of intermolecular forces, that you should immediately write down dispersion, right? London dispersion is happening in everything, in every chemical substance. So it's always going to be an answer. So we put dispersion, but then let's see if there's anything else. The next thing we would check for is a dipole. Is there a dipole in HCl? Yes, there is, because this is a diatomic molecule, right? It's a diatomic molecule where one atom is significantly more electronegative than the other. So chlorine is hogging the electron density in that bond, and since it's diatomic, there's one bond. It's a polar bond. It's a polar molecule. We don't have to look at geometry because there's only one bond at all anyway. So the bond dipole is the net dipole, and so because it has a dipole, it can do dipole-dipole, right? And that's it. So there's no formal charges for ion-dipole or ion-ion or anything like that. And then also H bonds don't work because this is not fluorine, nitrogen, or oxygen. Remember, only fluorine, nitrogen, or oxygen would make this capable of H bonding. So dispersion and dipole-dipole, and then what can be inferred about the relative strengths of the intermolecular forces in CCl4 versus HCl. Justify your answer in terms of the information above. So certainly CCl4 must have stronger intermolecular forces. So we're going to say stronger for CCl4 because as the temperature is going down, the particles are moving more and more slowly, and so the ones that stick together the best will condense first as it's cooling down. And so since CCl4 condenses first, it must be making very strong, in this case, only dispersion interactions. So the dispersion interactions in CCl4 are stronger than the dipole-dipole interactions in HCl, which is interesting. Usually we don't think of it that way. But clearly it's also about molecular mass, however, too. But CCl4, as the temperature is going down, they're going by each other and then coming together and condensing and forming a liquid. Whereas HCl still is not sticking together well enough. It is going to have to go lower. It's going to have to go even lower in temperature until the particles are moving even more slowly, so that they can have a chance to stick together. Because their dipole-dipole interactions are weaker than the dispersion interactions for CCl4, because here it's because of molecular size, right? We have a very large, there's 4 chlorine atoms as opposed to 1, and so that's a very large and polarizable electron cloud, relatively speaking. So, but we definitely want to understand that the main thing you had to say is that CCl4 has stronger intermolecular forces. That's why it condenses first as it is being cooled down, and HCl remains in the gas phase because it is not making as strong of interaction, so it can remain gaseous. So that was a very interesting one that went over a lot of different stuff. Lewis diagrams, intermolecular forces, stoichiometry, gas law, some thermodynamic stuff. So that was a very good problem.